The darkness of the night had spread across the sky. A cool breeze was blowing, and the moon was hidden behind the clouds, as if afraid to look at this place. The Waverly Hills Sanatorium, a place that once echoed with the screams of thousands of sick people, was deserted today. But was it really deserted, or was the noise of those thousands of souls still buried here? "Mom, I don't want to go here. Please." 8-year-old Amy held her mother's hand tightly. Her mother, Catherine, was forcing her inside. "Don't be afraid, child. This is just an old building. You shouldn't believe in ghosts," Catherine said, but there was a hint of fear in her own voice. They both entered, and the door closed behind them with a thud sound. Who is there?" Catherine asked in a trembling voice. There was no answer. Only a faint laughter. Cold, scary, a child's laughter. Suddenly, Amy's eyes widened. She looked at her mother tremblingly and whispered, "Mom, there's someone standing there." Catherine slowly looked in that direction, and her breath caught. There was a shadow standing in the darkness, tall, thin, completely black. Instead of eyes, there were two burning red lights. Catherine's heart started to beat faster. She ran towards the door, holding her daughter tightly, but the door closed on its own. Catherine clung to the wall in panic. Amy was still trembling, but then a woman's sobs were heard. "Have you seen my baby?" Catherine's blood froze. She slowly turned around. A woman in a white gown. No eyes on her face, just deep black pits. "Who are you? Where is my baby?" The woman slowly started coming closer. Catherine screamed, but when she looked again, the woman was no longer there. Instead, Amy was missing. Catherine started screaming like crazy. "Amy, where are you, child?" But there was no answer. Suddenly, a door opened by itself. Behind it was only pitch darkness. Catherine suppressed her fear and peered inside, and what she saw next shook her to the core. There were thousands of handprints in that room, young children's covered in blood. And in the middle was an old wheelchair, which was moving by itself. Catherine tried to turn and run, but someone grabbed her hand. Catherine looked back in shock, and her screams echoed. It wasn't Amy. It was a woman whose face was rotten. Blood was flowing from her eyes. "Why did you come here?" Catherine started screaming, but by then it was too late. Suddenly, a loud explosion reverberated throughout the building, and every room was plunged into darkness. Who had captured Catherine? Was Amy still alive? Was there really a mystery of death hidden in this San Giovanni building? "Amy!" Catherine's scream echoed throughout the San Giovanni building. Tears were flowing from her eyes, and there was only one fear in her heart. Her daughter might get lost. Amidst the darkness, her breathing was fast. Every corner was staring at her, as if the walls had swallowed her scream. She kept running, peeking into every room, looking out of every window, but her Amy was nowhere to be found. Sitting on the floor, trembling, she said to herself, "I will find you, son, no matter what happens." Suddenly, a strange sound came to her ears. Tick, tick, tick. The clock's hands were not moving, but still this sound was getting louder. Catherine slowly raised her head. In front of her, there was her own reflection in a mirror. But something was wrong. She was not alone in the mirror. Behind her was a shadow, tall, scary, with two burning holes in place of eyes. "You took my child!" The shadow in the mirror moved rapidly towards her. Catherine closed her eyes in panic. "Amy! Amy, my child!" But just then, she felt someone grab her legs. She looked down and her soul trembled. Many hands were coming out of the floor. Small children's hands, white, cold, and covered in blood. They all began to pull her, as if to take her into a deep darkness. Catherine used all her strength, freed herself, and fell against the wall. Tears were flowing from her eyes. "God, save my daughter." Just then she heard a faint voice. "Mom!" Catherine's breath caught. She looked around. There was an old door in front of her, black, rusted. The door was shaking, as if someone was knocking from inside. "Mom, I'm here." A ray of hope flashed on Catherine's face. "Amy, son, Mom is coming." She gathered courage and slowly went near the door. As soon as she opened the door, thud! A gust of cold wind pulled her inside. There was nothing inside, just a dark tunnel where a red light was burning in the distance. Catherine was trembling. She tried to turn back, but the door closed automatically. She was trapped. But the real fear came when she realized that there was someone else in the tunnel. Someone who was slowly moving towards her. Who was that person? Was Amy really here? Or was it just a hoax? Catherine was breathing heavily. Her hands had turned cold, and there was only one thought in her heart. Is my daughter Amy alive or not? All around her was pitch dark. Only a red light was shining at the end of the tunnel. From somewhere far away, the sound of children's soft sobs was coming. She felt like screaming Amy's name, but no sound was coming from her lips. She was a mother, and a mother can go to any extent for her child. Amy, son, Mummy is coming, she said in a trembling voice and slowly started moving forward. As soon as Catherine took the first step, a strange rustling sound started coming from the walls of the tunnel. Come, don't be afraid of me. That voice was of a woman, but so scary that a shiver ran down her spine. Suddenly, the red light flashed brightly, and a horrifying scene appeared before her eyes. Countless hands had appeared on the walls of the tunnel, covered in blood, and they were all moving towards her. The ground slipped under Catherine's feet. She ran in panic, but the tunnel was getting smaller as she ran, as if it was getting ready to swallow her inside. And then, Mummy! Catherine stopped. The voice came from the end of the tunnel. She could not turn back under any circumstances. Tears welled up in her eyes. Oh God, don't take my daughter away from me. She composed herself and started moving towards the red light. As she reached close to it, she saw a small shadow in front of her. Amy! She was sitting on the ground. Her back was towards Catherine. Amy, son, Mummy has come. Catherine reached out to touch her, but then Amy slowly turned her head, and Catherine's horrifying sight was in front of her. In place of Amy's eyes were two black holes, and blood was dripping from her mouth. Mom, you're too late. Catherine trembled and stepped back. No, this can't be true. But then some figures began to appear on the walls of the tunnel. Ghostly doctors, souls of patients, and the scariest thing of all, standing in the middle of them all was a nurse, in white clothes, but her face had turned black. Blood was dripping from her eyes. The nurse slowly moved forward and whispered, You took my place, Catherine. Now this place is yours. Catherine felt as if the ground had slipped from under her feet. Who are you? The nurse laughed softly and said, I am the biggest culprit of this hospital, and now you will be too. Suddenly, the tunnel started shaking violently. The walls started to crack, and a loud scream echoed through the place. Catherine fell to the ground. Darkness engulfed her eyes, and when she opened her eyes, she was now in a room in the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. There was dust, cobwebs all around, and the scariest thing of all, an old photograph in which she herself was standing, dressed in white nurse's clothes. How was Catherine in this photograph? Was her past connected to this hospital? Had she ever been here before? Catherine's breathing became faster. She was now in an old room in the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. The walls had cracks, a thick layer of dust had settled on them, and cobwebs hung in the corners. But the scariest thing was that photograph. In the picture, Catherine was standing in a white nurse's uniform, with the same bloodshot eyes on her face, which she had seen in the tunnel. No, this can't be true, she said, trembling. Just then, there was a soft whisper behind her. Do you remember, Catherine? She turned around suddenly. The same nurse was standing in front of her, with dark spots on her face. Her eyes were still filled with blood. You cannot escape from here. Your soul will remain imprisoned here, just like all of us are in prison. Catherine felt a strange tingling sensation in her mind. Blurred images started flashing before her eyes. 1928, Waverly Hills Sanatorium. She was a nurse. This was the same hospital, the same hall, the same rooms, And she was this nurse. Catherine was the reincarnation of this nurse. Her hands started trembling. Tears started flowing from her eyes. I was here before? The nurse's spirit smiled softly. Yes, and you did a lot of wrong things. Now she remembered everything. That nurse used to work in Waverly Hills Sanatorium, but greed and cruelty had turned her into a murderer. She killed countless patients by giving them wrong treatment, just for money and her ego. And when the truth came out, she hanged herself from the roof of this hospital. But her soul never found peace. Now her soul was reborn as Catherine, and she had returned to the same place. Catherine fell on the ground. I had done so many wrong things. Will my soul ever find peace? The nurse's soul spoke softly. Only those who atone for their sins can attain salvation. Just then, an innocent voice came from behind. Mommy. Catherine's heart started beating fast. She turned around and saw Amy was standing there, scared, trembling. Amy! Catherine ran and hugged her. Mom, it's too dark here. I want to go home. Tears welled up in Catherine's eyes. She looked up to the sky and said, God, if I really want to atone for my deeds, give me my daughter's life. I am ready to bear the burden of my sins. Suddenly, the whole room began to glow. Tears began to flow from the eyes of the nurse's soul. You repented with all your heart, and that is why you are being given a chance. The whole hospital began to shake, as if the ground was cracking. And then, Catherine and Amy fainted. Scene 5, The Salvation. When Catherine opened her eyes, she was in her bed at home. Mom! Amy was sitting next to her, smiling. Catherine hugged her and cried loudly. The Waverly Hills Sanatorium was now just a dream, or maybe an old life, from which she was now free. He looked towards the sky and smiled slightly. There is only one way to get rid of sins: repentance. Bad deeds never leave a person, even if his birth changes, even if time changes. But if atonement is done with a true heart, then the soul can get peace.